On the radiant morning of October 5, 2025, the streets of Ouagadougou shimmered with life and anticipation. The reddish dust of the Sahel glistened beneath the rising sun as people poured in from distant villages, farms, and schools. This was no ordinary gathering, no political spectacle or military march, but a celebration of something new, a vision taking root in the heart of Africa. Standing before the crowd was President Ibrahim Traoré, not flanked by soldiers, but surrounded by farmers, engineers, and young dreamers. His tone was steady but carried the force of conviction as he unveiled a national plan to cultivate tomatoes across Burkina Faso. "If we can grow what we eat and process what we grow," he declared, "then Africa can truly feed itself." For a land long haunted by drought, scarcity, and dependency, his words struck like sunlight after years of darkness. The idea was daring in its simplicity: transform the dry, barren landscapes into flourishing farms powered by solar energy and driven by the labor of the nation's youth. Factories would rise to process the harvest, ensuring that the wealth of Africa stayed within Africa. The people roared with excitement, not merely because of the tomatoes, but because they felt something deeper awakening: hope. Traoré's message was unmistakable. No more reliance on foreign aid, no more imported food that Africa could easily produce. This was more than agriculture. It was independence sprouting from the soil. Across the plains, his words traveled like wind-borne seeds, and in that moment, many realized they were witnessing the birth of a new kind of revolution. One not fought with bullets, but with seeds, soil, and the strength of will. Before this new dream took shape, Traoré had already achieved something remarkable: the 100,000 Wells Project. In one of the world's most arid regions, his government had tapped into the earth, using solar-powered drilling rigs to bring water to places that had forgotten its touch. Villages that had spent years without fresh water now saw wells flowing day and night. Women no longer walked miles in search of a bucketful. Farmers, once defeated by the sun, now watched green life return to their fields. That achievement gave the people something invaluable: belief. If they could summon water from beneath the sand, surely they could summon life from it too. That faith became the foundation for what came next: the tomato revolution. The same wells that quenched thirst would now feed irrigation channels stretching across thousands of hectares. Parched land would breathe again, turning into a living quilt of green. The wells soon became more than tools of survival. They were monuments of hope, proof that when Africans built for themselves, no dream was too large. But Traoré knew water was only the beginning. True liberation would come when the continent could feed itself. Food sovereignty, not foreign charity, was the ultimate goal. The new plan, christened the Tomato Corridor, was the boldest agricultural undertaking in Burkina Faso's history, an $85 million investment that promised to rewrite the nation's destiny. The blueprint was divided into 3 phases. First, construct 2 state-of-the-art tomato processing plants capable of handling 150 tons each day. Second, establish 25,000 hectares of farmland managed by youth cooperatives. And third, create export-ready industries to distribute tomato paste and powder across Africa. The project promised 3,000 direct jobs and another 20,000 through transportation, packaging, and logistics. But more than numbers, it promised dignity. Across the countryside, bulldozers cleared old cotton fields as engineers and farmers worked shoulder to shoulder. Solar pumps sent shimmering streams through new irrigation lines. Slowly, cracked earth began to glow with green. Journalists named it red gold. Foreign experts doubted its survival. But locals smiled. They called it destiny. For decades, Burkina Faso had shipped out raw materials only to import them back as finished goods, losing profit every step of the way. This time would be different. For the first time, the nation would control its own production, from seed to shelf. "The red fruit will become red gold," Traoré said again and again, and his people believed him. They were no longer just farmers, they were builders of a new economy. Since taking leadership, Ibrahim Traoré had repeated one truth that echoed in every speech: a country that cannot feed itself cannot call itself free. His vision was rooted in something simple yet profound. Real independence begins with the soil beneath your feet. No matter how powerful a nation's army or how loud its slogans, if it cannot feed its people, it remains dependent. Traoré had seen how decades of foreign aid kept Africa alive, but never allowed it to prosper. He sought to end that cycle, To him, farming was not labor, it was rebellion. The tomato became his chosen emblem because it grew fast, even in harsh, unforgiving soil. It stood for resilience, courage, and unity, qualities embedded in Burkina Faso's heart. "The tomato is red like our flag," he told students in Ouagadougou. "It reminds us that our struggle is not for war, but for work." His goal was to make farming an honorable pursuit again, something the young could take pride in. Murals began appearing across towns, farmers painted holding ripe tomatoes, smiling toward the sun. It wasn't propaganda, it was pride reborn. "Freedom," Traoré said, "begins when you can feed your family with your own hands." For years, Burkina Faso and its neighbors had imported nearly 80% of their tomato paste from Europe and Asia, an irony that stung deeply in a continent full of farmers. Nearly 40% of Africa's fresh tomatoes rotted unused because there were no local factories to process them. Traoré called it what it was, an economic trap designed to keep Africa poor. "If we can grow it," he asked, "why can't we make it?" That single question sparked a movement. The tomato corridor aimed to break the cycle, grow, process, and sell all within Africa. By doing so, Burkina Faso would save $45 million annually, money that used to flow overseas. But even more powerful than the savings was the message printed on every can: "Made by us, for us." The factories weren't just workplaces. They were classrooms for a new generation, teaching that value doesn't end at the farm. It continues through innovation, packaging, and export. This was not merely an economic policy. It was liberation, one harvest at a time. The red fruit became a symbol of defiance against dependence. As Traoré often said, Africa's greatest treasure isn't buried underground. It walks on 2 feet. Its strength is its people. The tomato corridor was designed around one simple truth: people are Africa's greatest resource. Over 7,000 young men and women were trained in solar energy, irrigation systems, and sustainable farming. They were not just field workers. They were innovators, each one contributing to a larger national vision. The government provided land, modern equipment, and fair prices for every crop produced. Each youth cooperative even owned shares in the project, ensuring that those who worked the land also reaped its rewards. For thousands of families, this was their first taste of consistent income through farming. The same desert that once pushed the youth to flee now called them home. Across the Sahel, young farmers stood proudly beside their tomato rows, representing a new generation that was not waiting for opportunity. They were creating it. Traoré called this movement the School of Sovereignty. His belief was simple: independence isn't something granted, it's something grown. In towns and villages, a new rhythm pulsed through the air. Confidence replaced despair. Children sang songs about red fields and green hope. The youth no longer chased jobs abroad. They were planting their futures in their own soil. Soon, Burkina Faso's progress began to attract attention across Africa. Delegations from Mali, Niger, and Chad arrived to study the solar-powered irrigation systems and learn how technology could turn deserts into gardens. The African Union praised the project as a model for climate-smart agriculture. For the first time, a small, landlocked nation was showing the rest of the continent that true change could be born from within. What began as a farming initiative evolved into a continental conversation about food independence. Africa, long dependent on imported goods, began to reimagine its future. Traoré's example proved that development need not come from foreign loans or handouts. It could be homegrown, fueled by sunlight, discipline, and unity. The idea spread like wildfire. Other leaders across West Africa took notice. If Burkina Faso could grow tomatoes in the desert, why couldn't others? From the dunes of Niger to the plains of Ghana, a sense of renewal rippled outward. The desert, once a symbol of despair, was now seen as fertile ground for freedom. Within months, the economic impact was undeniable. Each tomato processing plant generated an estimated $25 million annually, bringing $50 million into the national economy every year. Burkina Faso's agricultural GDP rose by nearly 5% in just a few seasons. Markets that once depended on imported cans now proudly displayed "Made in Burkina Faso." The government launched a food sovereignty fund worth $22 million to expand irrigation, transportation, and solar drying facilities. Farmers were given cold storage units to prevent waste, and cooperatives were connected by digital trading platforms that allowed them to sell directly. The country's currency strengthened, and for the first time, international investors viewed agriculture not as charity, but as opportunity. Villages once forgotten by maps were now glowing with solar lights and buzzing with machinery. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as a fragile state, was being renamed the Red Gold Nation. Before 2023, rural unemployment had hovered near 18%. But with the success of the Wells Project and the Tomato Revolution, that number dropped drastically. Thousands found work, not only on farms, but in logistics, construction, packaging, and engineering. The economy was no longer surviving. It was transforming. For many, it was the first time in generations their children had secure jobs and daily meals. Mothers proudly watched their sons operate irrigation panels, while fathers saw their daughters managing cooperative accounts. The phrase "Red Gold Rush" spread across the land, not as a tale of greed, but of dignity restored. In markets, women began jokingly calling the tomato paste freedom paste. They laughed, they earned, they believed. The scent of hope hung in the air, as precious as the money that now stayed within their borders. But Traoré's ambitions didn't stop there. He knew that one country alone could not sustain the dream. Reaching out to Mali, Ghana, and Togo, he proposed a West African Tomato Alliance, a cooperative network designed to share trade routes, reduce tariffs, and strengthen regional production. The plan included building transport corridors to coastal ports, enabling smoother export and import flows across the continent. For the first time in living memory, African nations were trading under their own agreements, not dictated by foreign powers, but written in their own languages, by their own leaders. Farmers from different nations began referring to one another as brothers of the soil. Traoré often reminded them, "If we trade among ourselves, we rise together." This vision quickly began to materialize, one truckload of tomatoes at a time. However, not everyone celebrated Burkina Faso's success. Some Western analysts dismissed the project as populist and idealistic. Newspapers in Europe mocked the idea of growing tomatoes in the desert, calling it symbolic politics. Others compared Traoré to Thomas Sankara, implying that his dreams were larger than his nation's wallet. But Traoré's response was not through speeches, it was through results. Within 3 months, yields from the pilot farms exceeded expectations by more than 20%. His message was unshaken. "We're not asking for permission to live. We build because we must." For every criticism thrown his way, Burkina Faso worked harder. As the tomato fields stretched across the horizon, their red glow silenced the doubters. Africa had heard skepticism before, but this time it was proving them wrong. Of course, the path was not without challenges. The Sahel's fierce heat tested the durability of solar irrigation systems. Replacement parts were costly, and some areas struggled to maintain new technologies. Political opponents questioned whether military-led enterprises would truly benefit ordinary citizens. Western sanctions limited access to certain materials, yet in the villages, hope remained stronger than fear. Farmers proudly pointed to their green rows of tomato plants, growing where once there had been only sand. "My children now eat what they grow," one farmer said. That, for Traoré, was the only validation needed. Vision was vital, but endurance was everything. By the end of 2025, history turned a new page. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger united to form the African Tomato Alliance, the continent's first independent agricultural trade bloc built without foreign funding. Together, they shared irrigation systems, standardized production methods, and launched a common export label, Red Gold Union. Some economists likened it to the early European common market. Western analysts called it economic rebellion, but Africans called it liberation. For the first time, trade deals were being drafted in African capitals, not foreign boardrooms. The alliance's long-term plan included building shared storage depots, processing factories, and even exploring a new agricultural currency independent of the CFA franc. It wasn't just about economics. It was about rewriting power itself. Behind the tomato fields, there was a deeper story. Traoré wasn't simply planting crops. He was cultivating a new kind of politics. He wanted to prove that true strength doesn't lie in weapons or wealth, but in a nation's ability to feed its own. The era of importing hunger and exporting hope is over, he declared. His government prioritized water, energy, and food over foreign loans, a quiet revolution against the old systems that kept Africa dependent. Across the continent, people began to see him not as a populist, but as a symbol of courage and self-reliance. By 2026, satellite images showed something miraculous: stretches of desert in Burkina Faso turning green. In markets from Ghana to Morocco, tomato paste labeled "Made in Burkina Faso" began to appear. Social media buzzed with videos of young Africans chanting "Tomatoes of Freedom." The tomato had become a flag of identity, an emblem of what was possible when a people believed in themselves. Children played in the red fields under golden sunlight. Farmers watched with pride as trucks rolled toward export hubs. The dry air, once heavy with dust, now carried the scent of growth. Across the Sahel, the message was clear: Africa can. At the center of this transformation stood one man, President Ibrahim Traoré, the soldier who traded rifles for seeds, speeches for soil. He proved that true leadership is not measured by power, but by purpose. Under his guidance, Burkina Faso had turned its struggle into strength, its drought into destiny. The tomato revolution was never just about agriculture. It was about rewriting the meaning of freedom. As the sun sank over the glowing fields, children laughed and ran between rows of tomato plants while farmers rested beside glimmering solar panels. The land, once silent, now sang with life. "We will not wait for permission to be free," Traoré had once said, and they hadn't. From desert to delta, his words echoed. The land is not poor, it's waiting for hands that believe. Whether one agreed with him or not, one truth was undeniable. Ibrahim Traoré had redefined African leadership, showing that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin with a single seed.